Hey my friends, the Pittsburgh Steelers have made a decision at quarterback that could tell us much more about the future of this roster than it may seem at first glance. For the second preseason game against the New York Jets, head coach Mike McCarthy has officially announced that Will Howard will play the entire first half, while rookie Drew Allar will take over for the entire second half. Aaron Rodgers and Mason Rudolph will not play in this game, and that decision immediately raises one of the biggest questions surrounding the Steelers right now. Is the quarterback competition for QB2 already starting to take shape? McCarthy explained that the priority is giving the young quarterbacks as many opportunities as possible. Will Howard did not play last season, while Drew Allar is a first-year player, and the Steelers already feel confident in what they have seen from their two veterans, Aaron Rodgers and Mason Rudolph. McCarthy specifically said that he has seen what he needed to see from Rudolph, while also making it clear that he wants to maximize the opportunities for Howard and Allar. That decision is extremely important because preseason snaps are limited, and every opportunity matters for young quarterbacks trying to prove that they belong on an NFL roster. Howard and Allar are now going to receive an enormous amount of responsibility in this preseason game. Howard will have the entire first half to show what he can do, while Allar will have the second half to make his case. But there is another part of this decision that could be even more interesting for Steelers fans. Mason Rudolph is not injured, yet he is not playing. Normally, when a healthy player is held out of a preseason game, especially a veteran, it can be a sign that the coaching staff already has a very strong opinion about his place on the roster. That does not automatically mean Rudolph is guaranteed to make the team, but it certainly makes the situation more intriguing. Rudolph also played well in the preseason opener, and McCarthy has consistently spoken positively about him since the spring. So if the Steelers already believe they have seen enough from Rudolph, why continue putting him through preseason games when they can use those snaps to evaluate the younger quarterbacks? That is where the QB2 conversation becomes much more complicated. At this point, it is becoming increasingly difficult to look at Will Howard as simply competing directly with Mason Rudolph for the second quarterback job. Rudolph has the experience, the familiarity, and apparently the confidence of the coaching staff. Howard, meanwhile, appears to be fighting for something different, a chance to prove that the Steelers should keep 4 quarterbacks on the roster. That possibility cannot be ignored. The Steelers have continued to speak very highly of both Mason Rudolph and Will Howard. McCarthy has talked about the future he sees for Howard and has praised Rudolph for what he has shown. Those comments matter because it is difficult to imagine a coaching staff speaking so positively about a player they have already decided to move on from. If Howard continues to perform well during the preseason, Pittsburgh could face a very interesting roster decision. Keeping 4 quarterbacks is a legitimate possibility, especially if the coaching staff believes Howard has developed enough to deserve a place on the team, while also wanting the experience of Rudolph and the long-term potential of Drew Allar. But there is also a difficult reality here. If the Steelers decide they only want 3 quarterbacks, Will Howard could be the player caught in the middle. Howard was selected in the 6th round, and because of that, the Steelers would have less invested in him compared with other quarterbacks on the roster. That does not mean he has played poorly. In fact, the opposite is true. He has shown enough promise to make this decision genuinely difficult. He has done what the team has asked him to do, and another strong preseason performance could make it even harder for Pittsburgh to move on from him. At the same time, the Steelers appeared to believe strongly in Drew Allar's long-term potential. If Pittsburgh sees Allar as the better developmental option for the future, while also valuing Mason Rudolph as a high-end QB2 for the current season, then Howard could potentially become the odd man out. That is why this preseason game against the Jets is so important for Howard. He is not simply playing for statistics. He is playing for his place on this roster. And then there is the injury situation, which has become another major concern for Pittsburgh. The Steelers currently have a growing list of players dealing with injuries, and the secondary is especially affected. Jennings Dunker suffered a new injury and did not practice in pads, which is notable because he had played well in the preseason opener, and the team would obviously like to see more from him as the preseason continues. Michael Pittman Jr. and DK Metcalf remain injured, while Max Ahianakor also continues to miss practice. Brandon Smith and Sebastian Joseph Day were also among the players who did not practice, but the biggest concern may be the number of defensive backs dealing with injuries at the same time. Dallon Everett did not practice because of a new injury. Brandon Echols is dealing with an ankle issue. Joey Porter Jr. is dealing with a back injury. Jalen Ramsey is dealing with a knee issue. Israel Mukuamu has a new injury at safety, and Jaquan Brisker has also been dealing with an injury over the past several weeks. That is a lot of players from the same position group dealing with problems at the same time, and it helps explain why the Steelers have been connected to discussions involving veteran defensive backs who could potentially provide additional depth. When so many members of the secondary are unavailable at the same time, the depth of the roster gets tested quickly. The good news is that Mike McCarthy expects these players to be ready for the start of Week 1. That is obviously an important update for Pittsburgh because these are not minor names on the roster. They are players who could have significant roles on both sides of the football. Still, Steelers fans have every reason to watch this situation closely over the next few weeks. The preseason is supposed to be about evaluation, but when injuries begin piling up, the evaluation process becomes much more difficult, and while all of that is happening, Pittsburgh also made an important move to secure Keeanu Benton for the future. Benton's new contract is a 4-year, $72 million extension, giving him an average of $18 million per season, but the newly revealed structure of the contract makes the deal even more interesting for the Steelers. Only $14 million is fully guaranteed, while his cap hit this season remains below $5 million before increasing over the life of the contract. That structure gives Pittsburgh something extremely valuable: flexibility. If Benton becomes the disruptive interior pass rusher the Steelers believe he can become, this contract could look like an excellent value, but if things do not work out, the team is not necessarily locked into an enormous financial commitment for the entire duration of the deal. The expectation is that Benton should have more opportunities to rush the passer this season because he will not be playing the nose tackle position. That could be a major development for his career. He has already shown athletic ability and disruptive potential on the interior, and giving him more opportunities to attack quarterbacks could allow him to take another major step forward. If Benton breaks out and becomes one of the league's better interior pass rushers, the Steelers could end up looking at this contract very differently a year or two from now. But the important thing is that Pittsburgh appears to have protected itself on both sides of the equation. If Benton plays at a high level, the Steelers have secured a talented defensive lineman at a potentially valuable price. If he struggles or injuries become a major problem, the contract does not appear to leave Pittsburgh trapped for the entire length of the deal. That makes this one of the more intriguing roster decisions happening in Pittsburgh right now, especially when you consider how many other questions the Steelers are trying to answer before the regular season. So now we have several major storylines developing at the same time. Will Howard is getting an entire half to prove himself, Drew Allar is getting the entire second half, Mason Rudolph is being held out despite being healthy, the Steelers are dealing with a growing number of injuries in the secondary, and Keeanu Benton has just received a contract that could become one of the team's better investments if he takes the next step. The quarterback situation, however, may be the one that deserves the closest attention, because every snap Howard and Allar take against the Jets could influence the final shape of this roster. So Steelers fans, I want to know what you think. After seeing Mason Rudolph sit out while Will Howard and Drew Allar receive the majority of the preseason quarterback reps, do you believe the Steelers should keep all 4 quarterbacks on the final roster, or do you think Will Howard is ultimately the player who gets left out? The answer to that question could have a major impact on the final shape of the Steelers roster, because this is no longer just about finding a backup quarterback. It is about deciding how Pittsburgh wants to balance experience, present-day reliability, and long-term development at one of the most important positions on the team. Mason Rudolph appears to have put himself in a strong position. He is healthy, he has already shown the coaching staff what he can do, and Mike McCarthy has made it clear that he feels good about his veteran quarterback. That is why Rudolph sitting out this preseason game becomes so interesting. The Steelers are essentially taking away valuable game reps from a player they may already feel comfortable with and giving those opportunities to Howard and Allar instead. For Will Howard, that creates a very simple challenge. He has to make it difficult for the Steelers to leave him off the roster. Howard will have an entire first half to do exactly that. There is no need for him to think about trying to prove everything on one play. What matters is showing the coaching staff that he can operate the offense, make good decisions, handle the opportunities he receives, believes and continue demonstrating the promise that has already made this quarterback situation so interesting. Because if Heyward plays well, Pittsburgh may eventually have to ask a very difficult question: why let him go? That is where roster construction becomes complicated. The Steelers may believe Mason Rudolph is the safest option to serve as QB2 behind Aaron Rodgers. They may believe Drew Allar has the long-term upside they want to develop, and they may also believe Will Heyward deserves to remain in the building after what he has shown. Those three ideas can all be true at the same time, but keeping all three behind Rodgers means Pittsburgh would have to dedicate 4 roster spots to quarterbacks. That is a significant decision for any NFL team. Every roster spot matters. There are other positions where players are competing for their opportunity, and the Steelers have injuries creating additional pressure on their depth. So keeping 4 quarterbacks could mean sacrificing depth somewhere else. That is why Howard's performance is so important. If he struggles, the Steelers may have a much easier decision, but if he plays well enough to force the coaching staff to continue believing in him, the situation becomes much more difficult. At that point, the Steelers would have to decide whether the value of keeping Heyward is greater than the value of using that roster spot elsewhere. And then there is Drew Allar. The rookie is receiving the entire second half, which gives him an enormous opportunity to continue his development. The Steelers clearly want to see what he can do with extended playing time, and McCarthy's decision shows that this is not simply about giving the young quarterbacks a few meaningless snaps. The goal is to maximize their opportunities. Allar is still at the beginning of his professional development, and Pittsburgh needs to learn as much as possible about how he is adapting to the offense. Every preseason rep gives the coaching staff more information